It's great to be here. Thank you all for being here. So the topic we are going to be discussing here is essentially what are ways in which, particularly policy, that Europe can do to give itself a boost in the area of technology. You look at some of the statistics, whether it's venture capital, the number of the world's biggest startups, publicly listed companies, and Europe trails in almost every regard. And so I'm curious, we're going to talk about how perhaps we can change that. One question I wanted to start, and maybe Frédéric, I'll start with you, is whether or not it's too late. Has Europe missed its window? Because you have these gigantic companies, particularly in the United States, that have created these kind of moats around themselves that make it very hard to compete against. And so is it too late for Europe?
I can't let you say that. No, well, if we look at the numbers, sure, it's impressive. And if we look at the unicorns, the number of unicorns we have in Europe compared to the number of unicorns we have in the US, so we have 30 in Europe, right, and about 170 in the US. Well, technically, if you were playing tennis, this is called 6-1. Okay, it's a bad start, but we have several sets.
Yeah.
So, and I think everything we're doing here today with VivaTech is showing that we'll strike back and we will be back in the game, and we are fixing ourselves and we are accelerating the pace to have some good tech companies which are able to export their technology and their knowledge and to conquer new territories.
Martin, I wanted to get your perspective working at BOLT, which is taking on one of these big American giants in a lot of markets, and you've had some success with BOLT. So what lessons learned can others take from that in competing against a giant American company?
I would say it all comes down to the team at first, so that BOLT has 3 founders. My younger brother was just 19 when we started, straight out of high school, and the technical co-founder was 25, so I was around 35 during that time, so we had a very good mix of ambition, experience, and tech. And yeah, we started from a small Baltic state, and then started growing in Eastern Europe. First probably 3 years, we were fully under the radar. No one knew about it. And it was very, very difficult to raise funding as well when our global giant competitors were raising billions. And everyone had a mindset that it's even impossible to compete with the companies with billions. But when you work city by city or market by market, you have a clear vision, ambition, then we are one of the proofs of the story that you can do it. And even with low funding, even without well-known brands and all of that, if you work hard and then you build a lean operations and all of that, you can do it. So I mean, yeah, Estonia has shown, and Eastern European companies, many of them have shown that you can go against the giants if you really focus and understand your customers. In our case, understand the drivers, give them better earnings, understand the passengers, give them better convenience, local habits, and other things, and you can do it.
Pauline, how does this, I can hand you my, as a venture capitalist, how does it affect your decision making in which companies to invest in? You guys focus a lot on sort of business to business startups. Do you find yourself consciously avoiding investing in companies that might be in the same lane as one of these big American or Chinese companies?
Yes, we are not looking only for unicorns. Of course, this is the type of stories we'd like to tell. At Elaia, we had the chance out of the 30 to have 2 in portfolio. One is a Criteo that has been IPO'd in the Nasdaq a couple of years ago, and another one is Sigfox. But we don't only look at this only type of growth path. I mean, it varies according to the size of your fund. The bigger your fund is, the bigger type of stories you are looking for. As an early stage investor, what you are looking for is a good team, a good ambition, and a good product. But then you have so many things that can happen along the road that you you need to first support the company from a business and product and team perspective, help structuring, but yes, we are looking for ambitions, and the fact that a lot of VCs are now raising more funds and bigger funds helps that.
Yeah. I neglected to ask that we do have a Q&A function here, so feel free to go on and throw a few questions our way, and we will. I got an iPad up here, and I'll throw it to the panel. Claude, I wanted to ask you if there's one thing that Europe is known for in technology, it's regulation, particularly in areas of antitrust, privacy, increasingly content regulation. But I'm curious whether or not that can have the adverse effect as well, and whether that's impeding the technology ecosystem in Europe, and if so, what needs to be changed?
Thank you very much, and very happy to be here, especially with great examples of what Europe can do. Let me just very quickly tell you that I'm one of those that believes that in the next wave of innovation, really Europe will be at the forefront. I've spent 5 years talking to innovators, looking at the European ideas, and my conclusion is that we have amazing ideas, but unfortunately we still have a fragmented market. A market that is divided country by country instead of being one market of 500 million people. And so that is so important for all of you to think what you're going to do in the next European elections, because the decision will be in between the ones that believe that Europe should kind of go back to a country by country, to borders, to barriers, to the others that think in a different way. And you as entrepreneurs, you represent that Europe that is a borderless Europe. That's what makes you sell products, that's what makes you really do your companies. But let me answer your question in terms of the regulation. I think that there's always this perception that most of the times is wrong, that Europe over-regulates. And one of the experiences I made when I started was to create this kind of a platform that we call the innovation deals. And that was something that the Dutch had done, just to put entrepreneurs, the regulator at the European level, and the regulator at the country level. And the entrepreneur would come and say, look, I have a problem. I cannot do this company because you have too much regulation on this point. In 70% of the cases, there was just a kind of a misinterpretation of the law, or there was a kind of a mindset that people by definition were afraid to go, thinking that the law was more restrictive than it was. And sometimes that was the case, because a lot of the countries, when they look to a European directive, what they do is at the national level, they say, oh, let's be a little bit more restrictive, or let's do a little bit more in my way. And so one of the things we've done is like to try to clean up that, to talk to the countries and to the regulators and say, look, in the future, you're going to not be able to regulate just by yourself as a politician. You have to sit down with the entrepreneurs to build that regulation. And we kind of created 3 principles that I'm trying to ask countries to do. One is that you have to have sunset clauses when you have a regulation. Today you have a lot of regulation that is lingering there just and is not even useful because the product that you're trying to regulate is not there anymore. The second one was about experimentation clauses. Where you have a regulation, you have to have a clause that allows people to experiment. And the third one that was more difficult was about something we call the right to challenge. That someone can go to a government and say, look, I want to challenge you on that. I can achieve exactly the same good results without following your regulation. And if that's the case, if the outcome is as good, then you should waive that person to comply with that regulation. So this is really easier said than done, but that's been a little bit of my fight for these 5 years.
Yeah. Frédéric, what do you think? I mean, what are some of the biggest challenges that you've run into as you've built up Blablacar that you think has really restricted the company's growth?
So I'll be speaking both for Blablacar and also for the startups in France. I also represent France Digital, which is the largest startup association in Europe with 1,400 startups. And what we came up with at the conclusion was that, of course, we miss some harmonization throughout Europe. We need to have things which are the same everywhere, because growing a company is already hard enough. If you also need to cope with 28 regulations, you don't grow as fast. I mean, there is a comparison, like growing a company in the US is like running a 100 meters race, and growing a company in Europe is just like running a 110 meters hurdle race with 28 hurdles, or 27, I'll let you choose. But I mean, it's each time you have to recreate your environment. You have got different tax schemes, you've got different labor laws, you've got no way to unify your stock option plan. So to motivate your entire team, it is super hard, because the rules that apply to stock options are very different depending on the country. So you can't say to everybody, okay, we've shared the value that we'll be creating all together, and we're all in it together. And you have someone say, yeah, but actually in my country, I'll be taxed when I receive shares, so I'm not sure I want them. And so not everybody is taxed at the same time. And also, so there are two things we need to focus on. It's like harmonizing, and this is the role of the Commission, and all the work that's been done at the European level, and also attractivity. Because right now we are showing that we are able to attract capital. If I take the example of France alone, 3 years ago, we had raised, like the startup scene and scale-up scene had raised VC money for 1.8 billion euros in a year. Last year it was 3.6 billion, and until now, so in the first months of 2019, it's 1.7 billion that the ecosystem has raised. So the same amount as 3 years ago, and we will end up probably at 5 billion for France alone this year. It's great, but then we've got the next issue, which is we've got to transform this capital into talent to execute the mission that investors give us, and we are in a total shortage. We don't have enough people in the tech sector. And so that's why a few days ago, when we had this conference with France Digital and VivaTech, we launched a program which is called +1 for Tech, meaning if you guys meet someone who is clever and is not working in the tech sector, please advertise, recruit that person. It may be a friend, it may be an ex-colleague who is doing some finance or consulting, and you just explain them that tech is so much more cool, that they need to join a tech company. We desperately need talent from everywhere. We're able to raise capital, but we need to be vocal about our attractivity and how cool it is to create tech companies and to grow them internationally.
What are a couple policy ideas that you think would really give the area a boost?
Everything is summed up in the paper that France Digital published a couple of weeks ago, but amongst I think the best areas is, yes, the attractivity to workers. It can mean on a national basis, so how you incentivize people with a compensation plan that are harmonized across Europe. It can be the startup visa, also, which brings the idea of welcoming talents from all around the world. I think there is also a lot to be done on the academic side. Going for talents in research labs, in academic institutes. At the very beginning of the core tech, before it becomes an industry. This is something we are working on at Elaia. We are trying to invest even before the early stage classical round to go in research labs and not turn an engineer into an entrepreneur, but raise consciousness that this tech should be turned into a business. There are a lot to do as well in the tax field, and also, of course, in the capital world. You mentioned a few numbers. There is a lot more money poured into the venture capital world. I think what we need to do more now is to bring bigger, massive money in later stage financing. Because what we face today is that amongst our best companies, at some point, somewhere between Series B and C, those companies go overseas to look for some capital, and we need to have enough money to finance massively our European champions.
Well, let me just build on that and you jump in, but it seems a lot of the ideas here are premised on the idea of sort of unifying Europe further, harmonizing a lot of laws across the region, but the political environment is essentially the exact opposite of that. I mean, across Europe and in other parts of the world, you're seeing much more nationalism. Brexit was a clear representation of that. You're seeing the rise of parties that sort of reject this idea of a unified Europe in the way that you're discussing. And so how do you square that peg?
I think that we have to acknowledge that people are unhappy. And people are unhappy because they feel that the wealth and the value creation was not distributed by the population as a whole. And so the populistic parties and the extremists, they sell a story of going back to the past, of saying, let's go back to the past when countries had their own sovereignty. And sovereignty in the 1600s was defined by you can declare war, you can basically collect taxes, and you can print money. That was sovereignty. But today, I mean, when you ask someone to tell them, look, go back to the past, it doesn't make any sense, because the past was not better than the current future we have. But the current future is unfair, because you guys are here, and you are all entrepreneurs, and somehow you have a privileged life, but we didn't create a system that actually distributes well the wealth that you create. And I think that the point today of people is exactly that. And so the way that you can tackle is about speaking about how can you unify a tax system where people pay fair taxes. Because a lot today that happens is that people are not paying their fair share of taxes because it's not unified. Why? Because you need the unanimity of all the countries in Europe, and countries will never agree together. And so it's a very strange, I understand that your question is extremely to the point, is that all the solutions are more about solving problems together, and the people think, or a part of the people, especially the ones that play with the fears, that you should go back to a past country by country. And so it's very difficult to explain, and it's one of the things that I've done for 5 years, is to explain that today, tell me one thing that one country can solve alone. Climate change? No way. Pollution has no borders. Cybersecurity? No way that you can. Your friend. France represents what? 1% of the population of the world? That's too small, I'm sorry. Germany, too small. Every country in Europe is too small. Enrico Letta, that I like very much, a former prime minister of Italy, used to say, in Europe there's two types of country. The small ones and the ones that didn't realize yet that they are small, right? And I think that this is something that we have to fight. It's something that your generation takes for granted. Most of you travel around Europe and think that's normal. It's not normal. It's not normal that you don't pay, or that you have no roaming charges anymore. It's not normal that today every country agreed on the standard setting for pollution. If we were in that past that the extremists and the populists say it was so good, Portugal had lower quality of water at the time than it has today, or Spain or Italy, and today we have a better environment thanks to Europe. That's one good example. So yes, Adam, we have to fight. There's no other way to do it. But one of the things is that when you look at the capital markets, it's one of the things that you guys can help, because you can tell to other Europeans that because we don't have a unified capital market system, you don't have the venture capital that you need. You don't have more capital. So many young people that come to me and say, look, I had my company. At some point, I needed a ticket of 50 million, and I had to go to the United States. You had those problems, you know that. So we have to keep fighting, because this is something that you cannot just change from one day to another.
Martin, I want to bring you into this, and you're based in Estonia, which is often held up as a success story for creating an environment where companies like yours, where Skype and others can flourish. So what lessons learned there do you think could be extended elsewhere?
I think Estonia has been very lucky to have Skype headquarters or the engineering office being there. So last 15 years ago, many of the tech talent of a small country was working in one company. In top times, it was around 600-700 people. And that has helped a lot. So it boosted motivation for many of the people. So Estonians were otherwise small, but now if we saw that Estonians can build global products together with our international colleagues, that was very big motivation. Second was the network, so that we had offices in 10 countries, so people got to know their foreign colleagues. And the third, again, stock options. So if you're part of a successful company and it gets sold, or you can sell your stock, you make some money, and you can reinvest that into your own startup or the startup ecosystem. And then that kind of thing starts rolling, and then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So I would say a few of these things, but also the government, if they understand and they focus on startups and innovation, then that's very, very important. And luckily in Estonia, that has happened already for last 10 years. So the prime ministers that have been always supportive. We've had roundtables. So basically that means that if policymakers directly talk to startups, and I see that's now a bit more happening in European level as well. So you need these actual entrepreneurs around the table with their challenges, also with their success stories, so you can support the success, but also listen to the challenge and find what exactly is not working. Is it legislation? Is it some other things? So visas, immigration, fundraising, whatever the things are stopping you, try to understand, listen, and improve. And that's what is happening, and the accountability as well.
Do you think that that's a risk because there's been some political change in Estonia? Is some of the progress that is now at risk because of some of the political changes that are happening elsewhere?
Yes, as was explained, the populists are somewhat trying to bring back the past, and Estonian people and entrepreneurs are getting more worried that we need to come out and fight for that and show what are the values. And us as a company, it's also important for us to invite people for voting. So we work now with the European Commission, with many other European startups. We invite people to vote, and we even give them discounts so that they would actually understand that we want to hear what people are thinking, and we want them to really come out and vote. So those are the examples that you really need to take wider social responsibility and show good examples. So I see that if you look at the media, I feel that it's too much crime and bad examples are constantly there, and too little success stories that would actually inspire people. So if you constantly tell about things that are bad and not even related to economy or that part, then that doesn't motivate you. So I think stories like Marcus or other unicorns in Europe, we should highlight them and then bring them to talk to people, bring them to schools and all of that to really, I think the most important what people would come out of schools would be that I can build my future. It's not that my government is building it or Europe is building it. I am running my future. So that's most important. And if people believe that I can change my future, one person can do significant things. So if that mindset is getting more popular, we have a much better future ahead.
Got it. I'm going to look at some of the questions that have come in. Thank you for sending these. The latest one to come in, I think, is a good one, which is it gets at this idea of that a lot of the premise of what we're talking about here is essentially that bigger is better. You need to build a big company that is fast growing in order for it to be successful. And I just wonder if that is a sort of misguided idea. The person here, and of course I lost it, it says regulations in Europe result from striving for fairness and being social. Does focusing on growth impose a trade-off to those values? Frédéric, what do you think?
regarding the size of the companies, we're talking about jobs here.
Yeah.
If we look at the net creation of jobs in the US over the past years, depending on the statistics you look at, it's 30 to 50% of the net job creation in the US is directly or indirectly linked to the tech economy. So those are the jobs of the future. Those companies are driving the job creation. If you look at the way it happens in Europe, we are far away from those statistics. We don't create the future jobs yet. If we want half of our jobs creation to come from the digital economy, the tech economy, we have to really make it happen, which means transforming things on education, allowing more tech companies to grow, harmonize Europe. I mean, do everything we can to see those companies grow because they are the future of jobs. So yeah, the answer to this question, do we need to grow big or not? I think we want the jobs of the future, and they are here. They are there in those big companies because startups are great. I mean, startups create some small activity with 3, 5, 10, 15, 20 people, but then scale-ups create jobs by 50 or 100 or 200, and then the tech giants, the unicorns create jobs by hundreds, and the tech giants create jobs by thousands. And that's what we want. So this is this is a problem. We need to create jobs of the future, and the best way we've seen so far working in other geographies is to create tech companies and become giant.
Pauline, I'm curious, how do you ensure that some of these companies are tackling some of the big problems that the world is facing, like climate change, for instance? Some of these hard tech problems cost a great deal of money and are very difficult to get off the ground. So if Europe doesn't have as much venture capital or investment base to build from, how can you ensure that some of the companies that are coming up are going after those challenges?
This is why we need more money. When we prepared this panel, I was mentioning a company that we received a couple of weeks ago, which is directly aiming at having a direct impact on climate, for instance. This company was working on how helping companies to save their energy billings, notably in buildings, with very specific geothermic technology. And we were talking about the size of the fundraising, and the guy is at MVP level. So he has just built the product. Everything is not set yet. He hasn't started to commercialize yet. And the ticket of the round was a 15 million ticket in dollar, let's say at 10 in euros. And we were like, wow. And of course, to be able to propose something that matters in this type of industries, that really change things, you need a lot of money up front. And there is also a mindset in Europe that is not risk-taking enough, I would say, to go to this type of project and give this type of first check, which is quite big for an early-stage investor in Europe. But to go into this type of industries, you need to have a lot of money to just to know if it works. And this is where sometimes here in Europe we sometimes fail in comparison with the US, sure.
Well, we have run out of time. Fairly went very quickly. Thank you all for joining here, and thank you for sitting with us for part of the conversation. Enjoy the rest of your day.